Welcome to Rocket Ship, the home of epic React Native content. I'm Simon Grimm, creator of Galaxies Dev, and today's guest is once again my almost podcast co-host, Áron Berezkin, joining me from beautiful Prague. So thanks for joining me, Áron.
Hey Simon, good to be back as always.
Yeah, I think it's the third or fourth time you're back on the podcast. Before we talked about React Native EU and some updates. And today we're talking again about a conference because we've both been at the App.js about 2 weeks ago. And it was a pleasure to meet you in person.
Totally. For you, basically, it was the first time you are meeting people you have been like hosting on your podcast for the first time in person.
Yeah, well, like from 20 or 30 episodes, I almost met everyone that was on the podcast. That was really exciting. And there were great talks. We listened to a bunch of them. You actually saw more of them. I was also a lot not behind the stage, but talking to other people. And today we just want to reiterate on everything that we've seen, everything that we've heard at App.js. So you don't have to go through 16 hours of talks. I also have a video with 10 takeaways on my other Galaxies YouTube channel. So check that out if you want an even more condensed version. But we will try and go through the different talks and just make sense of what's going on in the React Native ecosystem, right?
Yeah, I just have to mention the video you put out was awesome. Basically, all the information from the conference condensed into 10 minutes. Yeah, guys, if you don't have 1 hour for this podcast, just go watch Simon's video.
Yeah, that's a funny thing. It's just a 10-minute video, and you might think, oh, Simon is just covering the stuff in 10 minutes. But taking the notes took me half a day because I watched through the videos again and had chapter jump marks from all these videos at the right position. So yeah, thank you for that. And also, I just want to mention, of course, Áron is a senior React Native software developer at STRV. So Áron knows what he's talking about if he's telling us something about React Native.
Thank you for the intro.
All right, so let's get into this. Agenda is open from the App.js, and it all started with the intro block where Charlie Chevier and James, of course, the CEOs of Expo, and they gave us a general impression of the state of Expo and where Expo is heading, right? How did you feel about that keynote stuff?
The keynote was pretty much about one word, which was speed, basically. As usual, Expo is looking at the web and how the, let's say, things work super fast there. You just deploy to GitHub, then you get preview of URL preview, which you can share to anyone in a second. Everyone can quickly iterate on changes. And with Expo, we can to some extent do it with over-the-air updates. But if you get into native builds and everything kind of slows down. So what was kind of big highlight was that they made Android builds up to 40% faster. To my understanding, it's basically at the same price as it was before, because I remember they sometimes, release much faster machines you can build your application on, but you have to pay a bit of extra. But this came, I think, for free, and you can enable it in your Expo project settings. And also with Expo SDK 51, we got a new feature flag, basically, which will make the bundling up to 6 times faster. So that's pretty good. If you have old application that is really, bloated with lots of code, it doesn't load it instantly as when you started the project. So bundling definitely has room for speed improvements. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. James was all in on iteration speed and how Expo makes it faster and helps people just to ship things faster because that's a critical piece. And Charlie had a nice little demo of a new tool. I think it's called expo.new. That's a URL you can go through and it connects everything, EAS and GitHub. I will probably not use it. I'm maybe not the target audience of that tool, but it will definitely make your process of setting up Expo and React Native and everything, including EAS, probably a bit easier. But beyond that, there were not really a whole lot of new things, just reiterating on what's great. And I mean, that's not a bad thing. We just had Expo SDK 51 a week before the App.js release. So we don't always need big news and breaking stuff all the time. It's actually good if it just keeps getting better.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point as well. I was a bit worried because like App.js came 2 weeks after React conference, where obviously React Native played a big part as well. So there were not many expectations for big announcements at App.js, but as you say, actually it's good. Like less big announcements, that means, more stability for the framework. That means kind of we are reaching the point where things get stable. Maybe sometime we will get React Native version 1, right?
Yeah.
So overall, I'm not like really sad that there were not many big announcements. I take it as quite maturity of the ecosystem. React Native is going still like moving forward, but in a good pace, not too fast, not too slow.
Right. We're gonna come back to the overall theme of React Native in the end with our little recap as well. The first blog was actually then finished by Nicola Corti, who talked about frameworks. A couple of weeks ago, this concept of frameworks is introduced, and Expo is now the recommended framework for React Native. I actually have to be honest with you, like after the first two talks, I couldn't sit on my back anymore because I wasn't used to like sitting on a chair for like more than an hour. I usually get up here at home. So I had to get up and I couldn't watch Nicola's talk live. I watched it later. Is there anything to add to the concept of frameworks from your point?
Yeah, quite a few things I would say. The main point is like they just wanted to end the debate, like, should I use React Native or should I use Expo? So basically they decided, let's define frameworks, of React Native. Like the recommended framework is Expo because, well, let's address the elephant in the room. There is none other currently. But overall, like just kind of distinguishing what is what, like there is no possibility now to start basically new project with React Native. You have to use React Native communities CLI. They moved the init command from React Native to the community CLI, just kind of to give a signal that, React Native, it's there, it's the core, and now you can build on top of that. And if you are not using framework, it means you are kind of building your own framework. So they probably will try to discourage it and like move people to certain frameworks like Expo. I don't know who is gonna come else after Expo,
I wonder too if there's like the possibility for some. I mean, there's always the possibility and room for another framework to come up, but Expo is at this point so advanced. Like they've been working on their stuff for many years and went through many hoops and like the whole eject thing, which didn't work out, and now they got their pre-builds and everything aligned. And EAS is the thing that everyone wants. I honestly can't picture any other company coming up with something over the next years.
Yeah, I mean, we had App Center from Microsoft, which was quite close to EAS, I would say. I mean, close, I don't want to like compare, but something they attempted, let's say, like the build process, the pipelines, and so on. And they had code push for over-the-air updates, but they are actually shutting down. So like everyone is moving actually to EAS. So let's see. Like these big companies, they definitely have internal tools. Microsoft has RNX toolkit, which is actually open source, so everyone is free to use it. But let's not call it a framework; it's a toolkit. And now people have to make decisions. Like there was a good example: should I use Expo modules or should I use Turbo Modules API? Expo modules obviously being from Expo, so it's very much dependent on Expo. So you get something like vendor lock-in, like even though you can use Expo in even like React Native CLI app, but basically they reiterated that Turbo modules are basically coming from the React Native core API. Therefore, it will be always compatible with any framework, So just something to keep in mind, what do you prefer for the future?
We can probably come back to that point once we talk about Fernando Rojo's presentation. Let's get into the next block. The next block consisted of 4 talks from Katie Kremen, Gabriel Donadel, Aaron Greider, and Evan Bacon. Katie gave a nice talk about Expo development builds. I actually don't have to say a whole lot about this. The only thing I want to mention is that at this point, really, it is recommended to use development builds and not the Expo Go application. Expo announced this, I think, 1 or 2 SDK versions ago, that Expo Go will now only have one SDK version, and you have to like download a specific version of Expo Go in case you like need a previous version. All in all, development builds are easy, and just use them and use Expo Go if you like want to spin up something quickly and test something out. But beyond that, that's my takeaway from development builds.
Totally agree. Like there are still people that don't use development builds because they haven't moved to Expo, let's say. They still maybe don't have the idea that you can do anything you want with Expo. So basically, you have to still educate people, and many people come to the conference, like for different reasons. Some of us, we know how things work. We are on top of the news, but maybe some product companies, they send their internal people to the conference to educate themselves, because maybe those people are not like React Native experts, but maybe they use React Native, so this education still makes sense, and maybe we will see it for 1 or 2 more years. Yeah.
For all those people also listen to Rocket Ship, you're going to get the latest news in here as well. And then Gabriel talked about Expo Orbit, which is, I think, an interesting tool. I used it a couple of times. So you can now also not only use it for Mac, but also for Windows, as far as I know. You can see your EAS builds in like a little tool. You can directly deploy them to a simulator. You can see builds from your colleagues and install them on your device. I think Expo Orbit is a nice and handy tool. Are you using it at STRV?
Like it's up to each developer if they use it. I use it a couple of times. Sometimes I prefer to download the builds into my folder and then have them like handy on my local machine. So not always, but it's definitely a handy tool. And I think the main takeaway was like they built it with React Native for Mac and Windows, right? So they kind of outlined what troubles they had to go through to make it basically cross-platform. And overall, like it was a good theme as well of the conference. It's not about only mobile and web in the universal apps. It's also about the Mac OS, Windows, and also TVs, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. With TVs, we're going to come back to that keyword as well. Then there was a talk from Áron Berezkin about real-time 3D at SpaceX. I think this talk was really, it wasn't that technical a bit, but I just like to see these real-world examples. And we all know that SpaceX, we assume quality with that stuff, also with like the Tesla application. And then he showcased how you can like pull your phone out at the sky, and then you see the dots, and you like collect the dots while scanning the sky. And I was like, it's just so cool to see what's possible with React Native. And all of this was just a combination of different tools. So this is always amazing stuff.
3D, Expo.gl, TensorFlow, all the hardcore stuff. So Áron Berezkin, like probably the smarter Aaron in the talk here. So he really presented something that opens eyes for people. That's, I think, is important, just not get stuck in our head that React Native is like for not too difficult applications. You can do really cool stuff with React Native, and they just proved it. It was very inspirational talk. It was basically for the Starlink application. So you have to be really careful where you position your Starlink, because there is lots of obstruction in the space. So the application with scanning of the sky helps to understand what is the signal gonna be. And it was pretty impressive.
It was definitely. Yeah, it was just topped by the next talk by Evan Bacon. That one was definitely impressive, but we both knew that he gave that talk like a week before at ReactConf. So it was at that point a bit less impressive. Nonetheless, it's still impressive in terms of React Native news. So Evan Bacon, creator of Expo Router, talked about React Server components, how you can integrate them in your React Native application. That was actually like really the first time seeing React Server components working in a React Native application. And what he did was not just like showing like a little to-do application, or I can do 1+1 on the server and then get the result. He actually connected this with AI, and then he got back results from AI and displayed like really native UIs in his React Native application while streaming back the results. I think this blew everyone's mind, right?
I mean, definitely. Even second time, it was mind-blowing. As you know, Evan, he wouldn't be happy just to announce one thing twice the same. So he even like went another level. And I feel like he let the AI actually create the component for him that he wanted.
Yeah.
Basically. And then he was basically rendering the component from the AI. And everything server-driven. And when we talk about server-driven UI, it's also server-driven native UI, which many people maybe cannot still comprehend that it's possible to do basically with React Native. So definitely, Evan, as usual, he's pushing the frontier forwards, and we need visionary people like him.
Definitely. We just need to be realistic. I talked to him and to Charlie later as well. So it looks like the roadmap for React Server Components with Expo is more like end of 2024 or 2025, because Expo has to work on some parts, especially like the hosting part of your React Server Components. They need to run in a server-side environment, and you need to host them somewhere. It's a bit like the API routes introduced with Expo before. That was also kind of challenging for people to grasp like where to deploy this. And as far as I understood, Expo is working on a great solution for us. End of 2024 or next year, we're going to be realistically using React Server Components in our application. But for everyone, really, watch the Evan Bacon talk, the 20 minutes. It's probably your best investment of your time.
Definitely. And there was a cherry on top when at the end of Evan's talk came Cedric from Expo to announce Expo Atlas, kind of out of nowhere. Expo Atlas is basically a bundle analyzer for your JavaScript bundle in the React Native application. And basically by understanding your dependencies and everything else, you can start optimizing the bundle, something that we mobile developers don't really do, right?
Yeah. We can probably talk about whether it was the cherry on the cake, because some people said actually it was like anticlimactic after that epic React Server Components demo, and then there was like a bundle analyzer. But still, yeah, it's a great tool. Nobody expected this. And I just talked to someone else. We're going to come back to it, to Gabriel in a minute. For some people or some scenarios, the bundle size of the application does matter. It usually doesn't matter to us. We rarely think about this. But in some occasions, this is really important, so that tool will come in handy. And even if like you don't care about it, it's still something you can just run and check if your bundle is doing fine or what's blowing up your bundle.
Yeah, it's a good exercise, at least to understand what your bundle consists of. And to be honest, did they started to use it in context of server components, maybe basically sending the stuff from server and streaming it, kind of, that meant they had to start optimizing things maybe, and I don't know, I'm just guessing, but good that they open source the tool and that we can benefit from that.
Exactly. So the afternoon had some really interesting talks. I would like to skip some of them partially. So the first one was, and I will give a reason for that. The first one was from Kim Chouard. He was from France, I think. So sorry for pronouncing this wrong. How he built the music application to learn like guitar or any other instrument, and how he like improved the performance of React Native to really be on the beat in the milliseconds. I don't want to dive too deep into this because I will invite Kim to this podcast. We already talked, and once his application goes live or goes into beta, he will be on this talk, on this podcast. So let's continue with Dolly Ma. And Dolly shared an interesting not a config plugin, a package for configs, right?
Well, yeah. So she's from Chime, and Chime, I think it's a partner of Software Mention, one of their clients. They come to the conference to present, and actually, I always enjoy their talks because Chime, it's equivalent to Revolut, I would say. So, like this big fintech company that has millions of users probably. So they have to think in scale. And thinking in scale, 2 years ago they they demonstrated how they work, like when things go bad, like in backend, and then you put, let's say, some kind of maintenance mode in the application, and then you turn on certain parts of the applications gradually so that like people get like the full application working once everything is made sure that works. So actually I took some inspiration from that for my applications as well. And this time, Dolima, she spoke about feature flagging. So that's something that when you are at scale and basically you have to start doing data-driven decisions, like which color people will prefer better, like for this particular button. Something like when you are in a startup mode, you don't have really time for that. You just go and put there some button, to work. So these big companies, they have to really think about how they like unlock new features and how they're gonna look like and how they make decisions like what to keep. And if I go back to the configuration, basically they decided that rather than polluting the backend API, which would send certain like config for the user how to display the application, they are sending actually YAML files with the configuration. They found it better, basically because they don't have to change, let's say, the backend API. They just send this YAML file that the application expects to work with, and based on that, they display these experiments to users. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a cool solution. It's a cool plugin. I think everyone can install this if you're able to integrate it with your backend solution. I think it's a pretty cool way, as you said. Not for everyone, but for bigger companies, feature flags and that stuff is definitely important.
Yeah, feature flagging, it's pretty hard, I will tell you. It's really good for very isolated new features, but as soon as you introduce some feature that goes around your whole application, good luck not to pollute your code base. It's really hard, but it's a definitely useful technique that if developer knows, it's nice. Yeah.
Speaking of a polluted code base, Marius Stanis gave a talk about brownfield apps. And I was really fascinated because I have this on my list for creating a tutorial about brownfield apps, but the topic is so challenging. I don't know exactly why that is the case. I was hoping it's getting easier. So for everyone, brownfield integration basically means you want to integrate React Native in an existing iOS or Android application, pretty much taking the opposite stance as we would usually do. And he was sharing how he tried and actually did and succeeded the integration of a brownfield project. I think what was the application's name? It was
Expensify application.
Right. It was the Expensify application. Marius, by the way, if you're listening to this, I want to get you on the podcast. I couldn't contact him before. Through direct messages didn't work. I think this talk is really impressive. It's not a topic that's interesting for everyone, but he shared some problems he encountered doing that brownfield integration. Do you do brownfield integration at STRV?
There are some brownfield projects. To be honest, we try to do mostly, and we are lucky to do greenfield projects. Like that's definitely my expertise, like going from A to Z and get like delivered new application to startups or any companies. Brownfield, yeah, that's pretty hard. I really admire people who have enough patience to do that. Like definitely Mariusz is one of them. So it was an easy task, and I always hope that these guys that, like get lots of niche know-how about brownfield, they have the option to actually use it again on another brownfield project, because obviously many more greenfield projects come out, but there are still some applications that want to transition, native apps to React Native, and then people who have the know-how of brownfield, they are pretty valuable. So good for you, Mariusz, that you stick to it.
Yeah, it's still a bit sad to me because I talked to this with the Ignite folks. That in the past, when I worked with Ionic, they had this product called Ionic Portals, and that allowed you basically to drop into any kind of application like a portal, and in that portal you could run any kind of Vue, React, Angular, whatever application. You could drop this into a native application or a React Native application. And you had this made it easier for teams to work together. So you have like a shopping app, and then the whole checkout is like a portal, and a different team can work on that, and it's actually a web solution. So that worked actually really, really easy. And I don't know, why it's so hard to get this React Native portal into an application. Probably I'm thinking too easy about that stuff, but that was my dream. Maybe one day it gets easier. Okay, next talk was from Søren Brammer-Schmidt, and I think Brent Vetney was on stage before that talk as well.
That's correct.
Where they talked about local first applications. I wasn't there in person, but thanks again, Brent, for showing a picture of Vadim and me on screen. And that talk was about Prisma and Expo. So tell me more. What did you take away from that local first talk? I think I did a video on local first, so I was in that topic anyway, but I haven't used Prisma, or I haven't seen it in the context yet.
Well, it was just announced. You couldn't probably use it in that context. But going back to Brent, he basically tried to explain a bit more about the local first, let's say, field. Like there are many people that put lots of effort into local first, and they're super excited. But obviously, it's not that widespread as it could be, I would say, because it's hard. It's not definitely easy,
It feels like this trend has only started to get momentum in 2024, really.
Hopefully, hard to say. I feel like this goes in phases, when like every 2 years people have realization local first is the thing to do. You have like offline support, you have nice developer experience, and user experience obviously is great as well. But then you come to the synchronization part and everything like crashes like a house of cards, because that's the hard part, like you have one device, user does all the changes locally, but then you still need to synchronize it somewhere to the cloud, because if the user switches the device, you need to basically like start them where they finished at the other device. And I simplified it, there is so much more to it, And Prisma actually announced only the local part, not the synchronization. They said that the synchronization will come later, because it's a hard thing to crack. So yeah, I wish them definitely good luck. Me and my colleague were definitely like excited that there is like more focus again on this field, because we see how it works, like we spend so much time as developers doing these optimistic updates for the like button, like it's so much effort, like, and then you have to like invalidate all kind of queries just so you update the application at every place. When you use, for example, a React query, it's a nice tool. It helps a lot, but still maybe with local first, it would be a bit easier. Yeah.
Yeah, I worked with PowerSync before. So PowerSync is like a sync layer between your Postgres database and the SQLite database on a device, and they focus exactly on this like synchronization logic. I'm excited to see what Prisma brings to this. I'm not sure, is it right now more like an ORM for your SQLite database with Expo?
I think that's how I understood it, yeah.
Yeah, okay. But we're going to keep an eye on this, definitely. And I will also try to work with Prisma for an upcoming tutorial. That's going to be interesting. The day ended with 2 talks. I will actually skip that one from Gabriel, because I already recorded a podcast episode with Gabriel, which will come out soon. He was talking about EAS updates for seafarers, and we went into the versioning system they used a bit more in depth in our podcast. So go check that out in a couple of weeks. But the day concluded with Fernando Rojo, one of the brilliant minds of the React Native world, where he live coded a native library for, what's the library? Image gallery, right?
Yeah, so it was an image viewer. So let's say you have an image, and then you want to let the users to zoom in, and explore each corner of the image like in absolute detail, and maybe have some shared element transition or jump to the next image, So he open source Galleria, nice name for a library, as usually with Fernando. So yeah, he's great open sourcer. And the title of the talk is "Don't be afraid to build a native library." And I think that's the main takeaway from the talk. If I look at the image viewer, he decided, let's not do it with gesture handler and reanimate it. Let's not reinvent the wheel, and let's not use someone at NPM who already did it, let's say. So let's have a look and Google Swift image viewer library. So he found on GitHub basically this image library that is done with Swift, and then some other library for Android. And basically his task was use Expo modules and stitch these 2 libraries together, like align the APIs, make some wrapping, and then allow basically us like to install it from NPM. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway, as you said, don't be afraid to build a native module. I also in the past did a course on Galaxies about native modules with Expo, and it's just, yeah, it's powerful. It's really quite easy, to be honest, like to expose general Swift or Kotlin functionality, and you're actually also quickly able to like expose full views from native code. You can actually, not a storyboard file, but you can like with Swift and I guess Swift UI, construct a view and export that view and get it to render in your React Native application. Yeah, for everyone who thinks you can't do certain things with React Native, I think this just proves that even if you hit a wall, you can always like do your native module and then do the same thing that the native developer could do.
Yeah, great inspiration. But I couldn't thinking about the fact that like I like to actually maybe reinvent the wheel sometimes, use reanimated and gesture handler for these things. It's a great exercise actually, how to get understanding of these tools, and basically reanimated gesture handler, you're going to use it across many different use cases and applications. So sometimes I have tendency to reinvent the wheel, and I think maybe many of us do in React Native, because it's the tools that we understand, like, because if you wrap a native library, I don't really have understanding of the native library. I cannot help Fernando to maintain it, So obviously it's supposed to be maintained by iOS native developers, let's say, but how can I rely on them? So sometimes I prefer to stick to the tools that I know. But as the talk basically title says, don't be afraid to use a native library, or at least do the exercise how to use them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably a balance between just using what exists in React Native land, or sometimes using, for example, a specific vendor SDK because they only have a native SDK that you can use. And then you can just wrap it yourself.
Correct.
All right, let's continue with the second day. The first 3 talks of the second day were actually the last I saw in person. After that, I had to head to the Krakow airport. I think it was called Lotnisko. I think that's the name for airport in Polish, which I learned. So first one was from Delphine Bugner about the yoga enigma. Delphine will also be part of this podcast very, very soon. So just a couple of words. She shared a little bug in Flexbox and then went deep dive into what caused this bug and how our views in React Native are rendered. Tune into that podcast episode coming up soon. It was really interesting to see. I'm also always like, I have huge respect for people going that deep under the hood of React Native and checking out where things are going wrong. Like here, Delphine diving into yoga, and I previously probably hadn't even heard about yogas. Thank you, Delphine, and thank you for coming on in the future. Second talk was from William Candillan. Can it be done in React Native? Yeah, William gave a classic Apple keynote style, and he actually gave us 2 cool new things, right?
Yeah. One of them was basically support for videos in Skia, which is pretty phenomenal, I would say, because imagine all the like video editing libraries that you can build, or applications, so I definitely will see probably some demo from you, Simon, very soon, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating, but it's also not that easy. Like, it still requires a few lines of code, but yeah, a little filter or editing, like when you do a short or TikTok, that would definitely be interesting.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. They also like mentioned the collaboration with React Native Vision Camera, so it's nice when great minds like Marcus Savi and William Candillan connect, so the whole ecosystem benefits from it. And basically my takeaway from this talk is Kia is now basically the library that is pushing the boundaries, what React Native can do. So it definitely makes me excited what more to come.
Exactly. And the second thing he announced was this web GPU project. I don't know if I can find the right words, because this is probably beyond my skills of what I've used. Can you wrap it in your own words what this means for React Native developers?
I wish I could, but basically, I think the point was to show the support of like the performance coming from GPU. So you can imagine all kind of 3D animations or whatever, or even AI models.
Calculations, right?
Yeah, all these calculations, even AI models being powered by that. So keep an eye on that, definitely.
Definitely. And the third talk was from Christoph Magiera. He was he on the podcast? Yeah, he was, of course, where we talked about the React Native IDE. I also did a video on the beta of the React Native IDE. Check that out on YouTube. He just shared a couple of updates I think they made, which they got from like feedback during the beta. React Native IDE, to me, it looks really enticing. It's now open beta, so have you tried it out?
I did, like, very briefly. So if you take into consideration that the biggest pain point of React Native developers is always debugging, it's great and promising to see like these tools coming up, that we still have, where to push the boundaries. Basically, previously it was closed beta, so you could get access, download it from GitHub, the IDE. But now actually it's a VS Code extension, so just check it out. Now it's basically public and anyone can use it. And I bet Christoph will be happy to gather all the feedback to make it even better. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So as I said, after that talk, I had to leave. So I tried to watch most of the remaining talks, but I also would like to get your opinion on a couple of them. And we're going to keep it a bit shorter on a few of them, because we also want to wrap up with our own recap. So let's start with Tommy Nguyen from Microsoft. First of all, I think it's really amazing to see like Microsoft using React Native and pushing it forward. What did you take away from Tommy's talk?
Yeah, Microsoft is usually presenting at these conferences, so it's always nice to hear from them what they are up to. At React Native EU, they were like talking about standardization of APIs between web and mobile, and actually across other platforms. At this time, Tommy was basically talking how React Native is used in Microsoft and why. And I guess the why is the important part, like it's cross-platform because all the Microsoft products, they have to run at different platforms. It's constantly moving forward. So that's absolute truth, like it doesn't definitely stagnate. It just goes forward. And another point was there is a huge pool of talent of JavaScript developers and predominantly React developers that you can onboard into React Native,
Yeah, I think he shared some key reasons, like more sort of strategic reasons why Microsoft is using React Native, and one of them was like the availability of developers, because if you use some kind of alien tool or language, you have a hard time like making sure in 5 or 10 years you're going to find the right developers for that. And the one line that struck with both of us was that React Native is alive and moving forward.
That's a great quote. Let's put it on some t-shirts, man.
React Native is alive. Yeah, I could do Galaxies merged with that. Don't tell. Okay. Tommy, we're gonna keep it between us. So, next one was from Dominic Heinz about unlocking real-time engagement with live activities. To me, this just proves, and it fits nicely into what Fernando did as well, that you don't have to be afraid of any kind of native stuff. You can always do like your development build, go into Xcode, and then add a live activity, add a watch phase. You could interact with your Apple Watch, and it's just great to see that all these things are available to React Native developers.
Yeah, exactly. Like there are no limits. That's the point, right? So live activities, for people that don't know, like if you order Uber or Bolt, then you can see the notification on your lock screen, and which like updates basically as your order progresses or as the driver comes closer to you or your drive supposed to finish, or maybe like live sport matches, you can see the score of the matches. So live activities, I would expect to see more and more in React Native applications. And it was really nice that Dominic showed basically the guide and let's say the struggles he had to face to make it work.
Yeah, we one live activity I use is actually for an app called Easy Park. So in Germany, you can register your car, and then in like most cities, these areas are now digital. And so in my app, I can just say, okay, I'm parking here in this area for 1 hour, and then it shows me like this countdown on my screen. And I can also, while not at the car, book like time on top of that parking ticket. So that's a pretty nice thing. And I would definitely love to do like a tutorial on live activities. They just look so cool. It's just
definitely.
All right, Maxwell Phillips shared about TV apps in the wild. I must be careful because I think I approached Giovanni the other talk about TV apps, because there were multiple apps talks now on TV apps. But what was exactly inside Maxwell's talk?
So it was about like general pain points, I would say, with the TV development. Like it's very specific skill set. React Native has been, I would say, in the TV apps for a long time. Obviously, the cross-platformness is great because you can, let's say, imagine you have like streaming application. They stream via TV application, via browser, via mobile application. So you can share lots of code thanks to React Native. But TV applications, they are very specific. You have this focus navigation, all kind of different controls, manufacturers of the TVs, very non-performant hardware, from the TVs. And yeah, definitely a specific skill set. And yeah, I admire the guys that do it. It's not something that I would do. I'm happy to do just mobile and web because I feel it's quite enough. But yeah, React Native is a great tool for that.
Me too. I'm also a bit scared of TV apps. It's almost like brownfield applications. I really try to stay away from that. And the follow-up talk from Giovanni Lakidara and Eric Fuzzle was also about extending React Native apps to big screens. I think Giovanni will join the podcast here as well to talk about the challenges. I think they had also a nice example of how like your React Native application looks different on iPad, on an iPhone, or on a TV. The example with the NFL application, and it's just cool to think that this is just one React Native application that works everywhere, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's what React Native was made for. So
it's really the perfect execution here. Okay, next slot was Tala Nakwi from Shopify, improving Shopify's app performance. We actually couldn't find a slot for a recording yet. I think he lives in a different time zone than I do. But it's always inspiring to see how Shopify is using React Native, and they are especially pushing forward the performance, as we also saw in the past with FlashList, for example.
Exactly. It's exactly 2 years when they announced like FlashList out of the blue at App.js. So like the whole community was like super excited, and it was the best announcement 2 years ago. So many people, I think, had expectations for some, like even more innovation on top of FlashList. And there was some of it, I would say, in the talk. So there is a blog article how Shopify actually uses FlashList to basically render any screen, in React Native. Because imagine you have some home screen, and when you scroll, you have like lots of data, not in the list loading, but let's say a horizontal list of some content that is initially not really visible. So there is really no need for the application to render the content or fetch the content. So in the blog article, they explain how they utilized actually FlashList to limit loading of these things, and demonstrated how like faster the screens load.
It's interesting. I think I also use FlashList. You can have like a header and footer component. So it is sometimes a solution to tricky screens to embrace these components in different slots of it, right?
Yeah, probably. I haven't tried it. Like I'm definitely intrigued to do some more research how they did it, because I usually have like this home screen application, home screen where like lots of stuff needs to get loaded, so if it loads faster, better for everyone.
Exactly. And speaking of faster loading, Jakob Arvidsson talked about micro app architecture with Expo. I think the concept of micro apps or micro front ends in the past has been around for a couple of years now. Honestly, I haven't seen it a lot in native applications yet, probably also because most of the applications I worked with or got in contact with were never on the scale where it really made sense. I don't know. Did it ever for you?
No, not really. But, like it was application for JP Morgan. I can imagine they have quite a huge application. But yeah, from this talk, like we always like think, where is the monorepo and where is the micro architecture actually distinguished? Because sometimes it looks very similar, But yeah, definitely good exercise from them to demonstrate how it can be used. There is obviously some people that prefer monorepos and others that prefer this micro architecture. And I think maybe sometimes they, build one and then they migrate to the other and just try to find always, how is the saying? Like the grass is always greener elsewhere, So I think many people still didn't like decide what is the best.
I think most companies don't really have the time to try out different architectures, and like they just will select one and then they will probably be fine with whatever they pick. Then Britta Evans-Fenton shared an interesting talk about accessibility. To be honest, I think this was also really one of the highlights for me, because I haven't used accessibility a whole lot in the past, and she really shared some key points of what accessibility means in the first place and how you can integrate it in React Native applications, right?
I mean, for me, it was very like intriguing talk as well, like one of the big highlights, and pretty grateful to Britta to present all this stuff. And I took one quote from this presentation that will probably stay with me till the end of my developer life. Yeah. And that one is that we are all pre-disabled. What does it mean? Like some people have disabilities, but at the moment, like you might be healthy, your hands work, your legs work, your eyes work, but you are pre-disabled. At some point, it's possible that not everything will work as you expect, and then all the accessibility features that applications have will come handy for you. So maybe now when you are pre-disabled developer, think of it, and at least educate yourself about accessibility, and how can you make just small changes to make things better for people around?
Yeah, I think she shared some really practical steps in like how to group items or not group items in certain scenarios and how that works. I highly recommend it. And I will definitely rewatch that again to improve my accessibility skills. And then Philip Pan came around with React Native under the hood. And I think this is where my mind also turned off when I watched this, because this was probably also a deep dive under the hood of React Native and the new architecture. And I think it was a great description of what's going on, but that was probably beyond my skills.
Yeah, like me, I used to be like financial markets analyst. I came to development a bit later, so I just jumped into building stuff and focus on that. So I definitely have some educating to do, on all the like things underneath of all the tools that I use. So if you want to geek out on how React Native works, like Philip made really nice presentation. So definitely super technical. So be prepared for that.
Yeah, super technical. And I want to try and do a new video on like the new architecture and what bridgeless means and JSI, and like trying to make it easier in the future, so it's ready when all these things are ready as well. But in the meantime, watch Philip's talk if you want to see the technical stuff. And then in the last two slots, there were the two sponsors. So one talk was from Christoph Waldrich from Sentry. We all know Sentry for debugging our application and how we can level up our debugging experience. We shouldn't probably talk too much about that. It was a bit about source maps and using them in React Native with your Sentry project. Always great to see new capabilities for debugging. Gent Laborde, I talked with Gent. He might join me on the podcast as well, because he's just a really funny guy. And to Gent, I just have to say, I'm so sorry that you had the last slot of the conference, because talking on Friday evening at like 5 p.m. to 500 developers who've been through 2 days of conference this is probably the hardest slot to talk about anything. You could probably just like read a bedtime story at that point.
Yeah, but there was no better person than Gant to do it, because he dealt with it like a champion. So definitely kudos to Gant. Yeah.
Yeah, he had a really cool presentation, a nerdy inspired presentation, a lot of memes. It was building about an AI app, and actually pretty cool to see that Ignite, I think, open sourced this ML sort of learning kit or AI kit.
So it's Google ML kit that basically was like made like available for React Native, so it does lots of like object detection, face detection, and so on. So you can play with that now in React Native. Yeah.
Exactly. So that concludes 2 days of App.js conference. There were some smaller talks in between and some discussion panels that we skipped for the moment, but we're running out of time and we want to end with a little recap. So I kind of shared my 10 takeaways already in my video. That Expo is all in on iteration speed, Brownfield is challenging, React Native is going strong on all platforms, and these kind of learnings. Overall, I think that was, for me, being first time at the App.js, I probably had the expectation of, there's going to be a big announcement. They're going to announce a new SDK. They're going to announce a new component, something completely new and blowing our minds like Apple. And that probably didn't happen. I can't really, William had some big updates, but it's not like this is disrupting my whole React Native developer experience right now. Also, the React Native IDE is cool, but I used it before. So I think my main takeaway from this is simply that the React Native community is great. Talking to these people and just seeing that every person in this community has a different skill set. For example, we two, we are now the broadcasters of like events. I try to cover the news and bring it to people. And then we got people like Fernando Rojo, who built a great library or shares like inspiring stuff. Evan Bacon, who's truly a genius when it comes to Expo Router, or big companies like Shopify, Microsoft, Meta, pushing forward the React Native for different platforms. So to me, this was just the thing that the React Native community feels really great. I probably knew it up front, but the App.js just made it even clearer to me.
Exactly. That was my feeling when I was there for the first time 2 years ago. so much inspiration from the community, from the people you talk about, the same problems. You deal with the same problems at every React Native application all the time. So it's really nice to see the people coming through the same struggles and also like trying to learn from them and share the knowledge with others. And yeah, you need this conference to basically let all the big minds of the ecosystem meet, brainstorm and think where to take the framework forward, or framework React Native forward. Be careful with the words now. And yeah, for me, the same feeling. Small little advancements and announcements, definitely like nothing major, but I think it's a good sign because, last 2 years, they were quite hectic, I would say, with the new architecture coming in. And actually, I remember saying, like people saying, it's gonna take like 2 years for the community, to catch up with the new architecture. And now it's 2 years, and it's coming really, really close. Next version of React Native will have it turned on as default. So hopefully all the libraries migrate at least to the interrupt layer, so they will be compatible. And I think the community is very, very close to it, which is really nice.
Yeah, I think the foreseeable future is going to be interesting. So if we look a bit into the future of 2024 and what's coming, I assume we're going to see another Expo SDK release during this year. I don't know the cadence right now, if we're going to see 2 releases, but definitely 1, I guess. We might actually see React Server components in the first real application or trying out. With the beta version, we will probably most likely have Expo Router version 4 around the corner. I thought they would announce this at the conference. But, maybe that's coming later. And as Evan said on this podcast, once we hit Expo Router version 4, it will actually rebrand and then like be the version 1 of something new. What do you else expect for the rest of this year?
Well, let's see. Like, back to the conference. Let's talk about what we didn't actually talk about. Like, for example, there was no talk about animations and reanimated, I would say, besides Skia.
Right.
So that also is a basically sign of maturity, because reanimated did like lots of progress over the last 2 years, and finally it has stabilized really nicely. So that's a good sign. And actually, besides the music application, there were not many talks or mentions about mobile and web. Like in previous years, we had, let's say, various announcements around Expo Router, Native Wind, Tamagui, but this year it was kind of a bit silent. And at the beginning of the year, we saw the announcement with React Strict DOM that Meta is working on, which I think shifted things quite a bit, because now people wonder, are we gonna write, React code that renders to React Native instead of React Native that renders to basically HTML or something like that? So yeah, I'm really curious about the whole space of universal applications, because this year it was mostly about the new frontiers, which were the TV apps and desktop apps. So let's see how the web apps are like gonna play the role in the future for it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, universal apps last year were pretty popular. I feel like this year it's the trend is more local first and offline first stuff, and it's overtaking that. But you're right. Yeah, universal apps, since the announcement of React Strict DOM, it was quite silent. But I also talked to Evan when we did the podcast, and he said they were also working on something. I don't know if at that point he knew about React Strict DOM or if they're working on something else. Yeah, this is going to be definitely an interesting area. And there's one more thing I still miss. This is probably not completely tied to App.js, but in the Flutter world, there's something called Flutter Flow. And I asked on Twitter as well if there's something for React Native. Basically, it's like a drag and drop editor. To be honest, Flutter Flow is really good in the Flutter world. Like, you can build really great applications and configure them and whatnot. And I haven't been the biggest fan of like these low-code tools in the past, but what you can do with Flutter Flow is impressive. Honestly, I would love to see something like that for React Native.
I think there is one company. Is it called Draftbit or something like that? They were actually early adopter of Expo, and they always work with them very closely. There is a service for that, but to be honest, these low-code mobile applications, I don't know if it's me, a developer trying to protect my job, or, you know, like I even read about Flutterflow, and there were some developers from Flutter basically kind of complaining what code it generates. In theory, you shouldn't care because it's generated. So if Flutterflow is able to migrate the code to maybe some newer versions and it generates it again, so it doesn't really matter how it looks. But if someone has to take over this generated code and make some customizations, it's going to be always a pain. But yeah, I haven't used the service, so I don't want to like guess how it looks. But yeah, let's see.
Let's see. So I think we can conclude with a word: React Native is alive and moving forward.
Totally.
It's going to be an interesting year, no matter if it's RSC, local first, bridgeless architecture, or anything else. It's going to be an interesting year for all React Native developers. We too hopefully come back together once there are big news. If we got the State of React Native survey towards the end of the year, once again, I'm looking forward to that. And of course, any other news. So was there anything else you want to mention, or should we conclude?
That's it. Thanks, Software Mention, for organizing the conference. It was a total blast. The merch is great. You know, Krakow is beautiful, and we look forward to the next year.
Yeah, me too. I completely agree. If you watch on YouTube, I'm wearing the shirt. It is a very comfy shirt. We both have a really nice retro cap from Software Mentions. As Áron said it, thanks for organizing this, and we will hopefully be both back together next year, and we would love to see everyone from the community. So thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast for new episodes on React Native every other week. And of course, thanks, Áron, for taking the time.
Totally. Take care.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye.